Good evening and welcome to 16 by 9, The Bigger Picture. Imagine living in third world conditions with a soaring crime rate and half your neighbors addicted to drugs. Incredibly, it's happening right in our own backyard. Tonight, a 16 by 9 exclusive. Our Sean Mallen brings you the shocking story.
They are specks of humanity on a vast frozen landscape. Tiny First Nations scattered in the far northwest of Ontario. They have names like Wapakika and Yabmatung, Kingfisher Lake and Kitchener-Makasub-Ininawug. Accessible only by air for most of the year, or ice road for a few fleeting weeks in winter. But the isolation has not shielded the people from a devastating import from the south.
I was sick, and I felt like I was dying.
Prescription drug abuse, mainly OxyContin, is spiraling out of control. And the chief of the KI First Nation, Donnie Morris, says it's dwarfing the old afflictions of gas sniffing and alcoholism.
This is different and it's worse. It cripples families, it's crippling communities, and especially the leadership too. We just don't know how to deal with it.
I say about 60% of the people on the reserve do use drugs, that do have an addiction.
We agreed to not identify this man or his home community. He says he first tried OxyContin at a party in his early 20s. It wrecked his life.
I was averaging about $400 a day, doing whatever I can to get my fix. Stealing from people, hurting people. I lost my job. I figured that drugs were more important than working.
It was a story we heard repeatedly as we toured northwestern Ontario. Reserve after reserve told us that, astoundingly, more than half their people were hooked. Imagine the outcry if half the people of Toronto or Vancouver were addicted to a drug.
People go without, no shelter, no food, and I think there's a lot of abuse that goes along with that too, right?
OxyContin is an extremely addictive painkiller. Abuse is already a problem in the South, where pills sold illicitly go for $80 each. But up north, a single tablet goes for a stunning $400. Dealers sell a quarter pill for $100. This in communities where unemployment often tops 70% and many live on welfare.
Addictions in all their forms have scarred First Nations for generations, but this is something new and insidious, exploding in just the last few years. And local leaders are powerless to stop the flow of drugs into their communities.
That's a baby's blanket, isn't it?
Yeah, there's oxy right here.
In Kingfisher Lake, Chief James Mamakwa showed us just how brazen smugglers have become.
These are real oxys.
Yes, those are prescription drugs hidden in a baby's blanket. The tiny local police forces try to do checks of vehicles coming in on the ice roads, and the regional airlines are talking about baggage inspections, but they can't keep up. Chief Morris says gangs in Thunder Bay and Winnipeg are now in on the act.
It's organized now, trying to take all the money out of our communities and make them dependent on them to supply drugs.
The regional superintendent for the Ontario Provincial Police, Ron Van Stralen, says they have made some busts and managed in some places to choke off supply to a trickle, sending prices skyrocketing.
We heard $400, but you're hearing up to $1,200 or $1,600 for one
OxyContin.
It's kind of a funny way of measuring success, though, I guess.
It's a terrible way to measure success, but it is something.
So, mix in poor people addicted to expensive drugs, and the result is inevitably crime. Chief Mamakwa says his community has been hit with a rash of break-ins and thefts.
Does anyone in Ottawa know this is going on and taking an interest in this?
I'm sure somebody does down there. I'm not sure if they care, to tell you the truth.
You have to change the concept of where you're coming from.
At the KI First Nation, they're not waiting for help from Ottawa. They set up their own detox center, funded from their own limited resources.
It's our community problem, and as a community, I think we should deal with it.
A half dozen people go through every month. It's cold turkey withdrawal, with some counseling mixed in with traditional healing methods.
Well, my babies grew up half of the time with me being high.
Melanie Beardy has 4 children, aged 1 to 13. She's been using for 5 years and says her 2 youngest have never seen her sober.
All my income would go to that. and what I was depending on my family to feed my kids.
She's here to change that, but kicking an addiction to OxyContin is no easy matter.
I'm still thinking, what's one more line, right? One more, how would it feel?
So now you're just about ready to graduate from here. Think you're going to make it? Think you're going to be able to stay off this stuff?
You know, honestly, I believe I can do it.
Coming up on 16 by 9.
You quoted a number of 500 violent crime incidents?
Per year.
Per year?
Yeah.
500 in a community of what, 2,700?
2,700.
500 violent crimes a year.
Yeah.
That's all coming up. Welcome back to 16 by 9, the bigger picture.
Entire communities in the frozen north where children are raised in filth and residents live without hope. Here again is our Sean Mallen with a first-hand look at one of the worst places to live in Canada.
If ever there was a place with an ironic name, it is Fort Hope, a First Nation in northwestern Ontario where the living conditions are third world. I first visited here in 1989, and this is part of the story I told back then. On the shores of Lake Yadmat, you can see Canadian landscapes of exquisite beauty. You can also see diapered children playing in a filthy ditch. And you can see the home of Zacharias and Charlotte Misitiwajasik, a tiny bungalow where 16 people live. It's hard to believe that people live in a place like that in a country as rich as Canada. But when I returned to Fort Hope in 2011, 2 decades later, I found that if anything, things are worse.
How come you got the tarp over there?
This is Louis Sugarhead, and this is where his family lives, all 10 of them.
The door is not 100%, so it's really...
I can see right inside.
Despite being one of the lucky few in the community with a job, this is the best home Sugarhead can afford. With all those mouths to feed and a chronic housing shortage, this is as good as it gets.
So what's it like living with all those people in this little house?
It's pretty stressful at times, especially when you have kids crying all at once.
Only a thin layer of plastic separates the family from the brutal cold outside, and the inside is filthy, with mold, missing walls, and broken windows.
Falling apart, eh?
Not a good way to raise kids?
I guess, in a way, it's not really a good thing for them.
The one sign of hope for this community in 1989 was the bright new school and the promise of something better for the children. Today, the school is still there, but listen to the update from band manager Andrew Yesno.
The school was set on fire in the fall.
Even your school was set on fire?
Yeah.
That was when Fort Hope hit bottom. A wave of arsons ripped through the community. 12 buildings torched. The old band office was hit. And at this home, the residents barely escaped with their lives.
This house was occupied by one of the local ministers. He got up in the middle of the night to make some tea. He smelled something. He opened up the room door and the fire burst up in front of him.
That was probably the final straw, where they firebombed the house with the people sleeping inside.
The band declared a state of emergency. The local native-run police force was overwhelmed. Constable Jason Baxter was in the middle of it.
We'd have, within 5 days span, we'd have 28 to 30 calls for service. We'd have everything, arsons, we had a couple homicides, assaults, a lot of public talks.
Desperate, the band called in the Ontario Provincial Police for backup, and things have settled down, for now.
I think we stabilized what was happening, but we haven't solved anything.
How do you keep up spirits when you're dealing with this kind of stuff?
I don't know. It's hard. You go home and you struggle every day and you're wiped out. But you hope the next day is going to be a little bit better than the last.
Just over the horizon is the possibility of better times. A giant mining play nicknamed the Ring of Fire is booming on the edge of Fort Hope's traditional lands. Prospectors have found rich deposits of chromite, a key element in stainless steel, possibly gold and copper too. But band councillor Charlie O'Keefe says his people aren't getting any real benefit from what could be a multi-billion-dollar development.
Not right now, because the government's not even, they don't even know we exist up here. They don't even tell us that there is this activity that's taking place up north there.
All of which leaves Louis Sugarhead and his family stuck in their deplorable house with little prospect of anything better.
Do you think people pay enough attention to this kind of thing in the South?
Not really. If they did, then I wouldn't be living in this situation.
But as bad as the conditions are here in Fort Hope, we are about to go to a place that's worse. We ended our tour in Pikangikum, which might just be Canada's most dysfunctional community, a place stained by tragedy, hobbled by misfortune, and suffering from an astonishing level of violence.
Like I've been to other reserves, and it's no comparison to here.
Sergeant Jack McKay has been policing this region for 28 years and says Pikangikum is by far his most difficult assignment.
Last year we almost had 5,000 occurrences.
5,000?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How many people in this community?
It's got to be 2,500 plus.
So it's 2 occurrences per person here,
probably,
basically.
Yeah, basically, if you look at it that way, yes.
It's the most difficult spot, and it's the spot, in my opinion, in this area that needed the most care.
Regional OPP Superintendent Ron Van Stralen keeps a close eye on Pikangikum, and for a good reason. What his officers deal with here is hard to believe.
You quoted a number of 500 violent crime incidents. In what year was that?
That was in 2008 and 2009, 2010.
Over those 3 years?
No, per year.
Per year?
Yeah.
500 in a community of what, 2,700?
2,700.
500 violent crimes a year.
Yeah.
To put it into perspective, that crime rate in Greater Toronto would mean more than 1 million violent crimes a year.
And then there was the incident that happened last June 30th, 2010, at this building, the former police detachment. Accounts vary as to what actually happened, but it appears that a deaf man was arrested by a police officer. There's a report that the man tried to grab the officer's pistol and the policeman hit him to fend him off. Not long after, 200 people arrived here, surrounded the building, and they were angry.
To be honest with you, yeah, it was a tough day.
McKay was one of the officers in the middle of it. The mob literally marched the whole detachment of cops 2 kilometers out to the airport.
I think there were a couple of rocks, to be honest, that were thrown towards us. Yeah, but anybody armed like sticks or bats, I did not see that. No.
Pretty angry, though, were they?
What's that?
They were pretty angry.
Yes, they were, to be honest, yes, they were.
Crime, rampant alcoholism, and gas sniffing make Pikangikum a tough place to raise kids. The vice principal of the local school, Barry Owen, worries about the children, the ones he teaches, and the 6 of his own.
So always be aware, 24/7. You have to see it every day.
Yeah. Keep a close eye on your kids?
Yeah.
In the last decade, Pikangikum became known for its high rate of youth suicide. In 2009, 14 killed themselves, a rate more than 30 times higher than the national average.
Some are my former students, 2 of them. It took a toll on me when I heard it.
Principal Joanne Donnelly gave me a tour of the school. With all the problems in the community, it's not surprising that only about half the 800 school-aged kids attend class on most days.
We have kids who call and say that they can't come to school because they have to watch the house because they're afraid that they'll be broken into by the gas sniffers in town.
For those who do show up, the facilities are woefully inadequate.
It's kind of appalling. It's embarrassing.
The old school burned down in 2007, and there's no sign Ottawa is ready to build a new one, leaving the children in cold, rickety portables that were supposed to be temporary.
They've all got very, very poor insulation in it, so it's like every other day we've got frozen pipes or furnace is not working. Like this one here, the pipes have burst in there like 4 times in the last month.
No gym, no library, no cafeteria. Even the bare necessities are missing.
What do you do about this?
You build a school. You need a school,
I guess.
But perhaps most appalling is the building specially designed for special needs kids. It's been closed since November because of a fuel spill.
The kids that are supposed to be in here, we have kids who are blind, who are kids who are globally delayed, who are in wheelchairs or everything else, and they can't come to school.
We wanted to ask the chief and council about all these issues. We called several times in advance with no response, and when we went to the band office, we hit a stone wall.
Shut off the cameras until you go to
After waiting for a few minutes, we were advised to go into a meeting room to ask for an interview.
Are you in the band council, sir?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm the enforcer.
You're the enforcer?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were told an elder had died and they were in mourning, so no interviews.
Can anyone give clearance to talk here? I guess I'd have to come from the council.
Like I said, they don't want to talk about it.
Nobody wants to talk.
That's final.
And that was that. We headed for the airstrip and took off for home. Pikangikum keeps its secrets from outsiders. Its fellow First Nation Fort Hope cries out for help, but wonders if anyone is listening.